Have you ever watched someone plot against you, only to realize you already knew their every move before they even made it? Have you ever smiled quietly while they thought they were 3 steps ahead, not knowing God had already revealed their entire script to you? And now, can you imagine the humiliation they feel when the mask slips and the truth hits them like thunder? That the very person they tried to outsmart was the one holding the master key all along, chosen one. This is the beauty of what God has done in your life. He sharpened your vision so you could see beyond the surface. He trained your spirit to discern what no eyes could see. And He fortified your patience so you could wait until the perfect moment. While they assumed you were clueless, the Lord was equipping you with divine intelligence, heavenly foresight, and a strategy that could not fail. What they mistook as weakness was wisdom. What they mocked as silence was strength. What they thought was ignorance was God's secret weapon working through you. And now look at you. You are walking proof that the hand of God cannot be mocked, that His chosen ones are never truly caught off guard, and that no scheme of man can overturn a divine assignment. Their games collapsed into dust, their strategies turned into comedy skits, and their arrogance is now their public humiliation. Meanwhile, you stand elevated, not by chance, but by design. Comment 777 if you know deep down that God already gave you the upper hand, long before your enemies even entered the room. And let me pause here to give a heartfelt thank you to every one of you who supports this channel, whether through super thanks or simply by showing up with your time, your comments, and your love. It means more than you know. But let me tell you this. What we're about to uncover next will shake you even deeper. Because the story doesn't end with you outsmarting them, the real revelation is why it had to happen this way, and why God is using this very humiliation to launch you into your next level. Stay with me, chosen ones, because the next part will open your eyes to a truth the enemy never wanted you to see. God's chosen ones. They just found out you outsmarted them. Total humiliation. They thought your silence was weakness, when in truth it was the very language of strategy. They mistook your pauses for hesitation, while you were aligning with a higher frequency that their shallow ears could never detect. They laughed loudly at what they thought were your mistakes, not realizing those so-called errors were carefully placed bricks in a foundation far deeper than their sight could ever reach. For isn't it always easier to mock the scaffolding of a cathedral before the spires touch heaven? The prophet Isaiah once wrote, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone," Isaiah 28:16. And that is precisely what your journey reflects. Their ridicule revealed their blindness, not your flaws. Mockery is the work of the lazy. It's jagged, noisy, and instantly gratifying. Mastery, however, is slow, deliberate, and patient, much like the way rivers carve canyons over centuries. Did they not realize that your boundaries, your strange timing, your so-called odd instincts were actually divine indicators that you were building on God's timeline? When someone ridiculed your caution, all they did was expose their fear of discipline. As Paul said, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, 1 Corinthians 1:27. What they mocked was the very signal of wisdom. Yet ask yourself, why does discipline terrify those who thrive in chaos? Why does your silence cause panic in people addicted to noise? Why does your refusal to dance in their disorder shine a light on how enslaved they are to external validation? These are not idle questions. They pierce to the core of what makes your restraint so dangerous. Your control. your refusal to be baited, was not naivety, it was sovereignty. Long before the theatrics began, you were decoding their patterns like an architect, studying the resonance of arches and beams. You had learned the science of small economies of trust, distributing your energy only where it multiplied instead of where it drained. This is no different than the principle of resonance in physics. Two frequencies only amplify each other when in harmony. To those who live by extremes, that balance seemed odd. But the truth? It was power disguised as patience. Better a patient person than a warrior. One with self-control than one who takes a city. Proverbs 16:32. History reminds us of this truth as well. The Italian sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini, once mocked for his unfinished marble, revealed in time works so breathtaking that critics were forced into silence. Just as his chisel's restraint produced eternal masterpieces, your patience has been shaping victories others cannot yet comprehend. The irony? Their laughter only echoed their own insecurity. Your enemies called you slow or naive. Yet it was a strange compliment coming from those who only measure life in trophies that glitter briefly. They were obsessed with the instant applause of the crowd. While you cultivated the invisible wins, habits formed in quiet rooms, prayers whispered in solitude, promises kept when no eyes were watching. The German hymn, Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott, a mighty fortress is our God, sings of this hidden strength. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. And indeed, your strength was never in the noise. It was in the fortress of silence, built brick by brick through restraint. So what happens when patience finally unveils results? Their laughter curdles into embarrassment. Their gossip loses its grip. Their comparisons collapse. What they thought was ignorance was, in truth, your architecture of longevity. Judas Iscariot, once proud of his cunning betrayal, found his name forever marked with disgrace. The consequence of short-term deception is humiliation, while the fruit of endurance is eternal legacy. For we walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5-7. Even in ordinary life, this pattern holds true. A young woman named Clara, who once worked in silence as a janitor at a small school, endured years of mockery from peers who saw her job as meaningless. But quietly, she studied at night, saved every penny, and invested wisely. Years later, she became the founder of a thriving local business that employed dozens, while those who mocked her begged for positions under her leadership. Her story echoes yours. Mockery cannot kill mastery. It only delays recognition. Nature itself testifies to this rhythm. The bamboo plant, for years, shows no outward growth, causing many to dismiss it as lifeless. Yet once its roots are established, it shoots upward to heights others cannot match. Isn't that exactly how your journey unfolded? Quiet years of unseen preparation suddenly bursting into undeniable victory. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Psalm 37:6. And when the tide turned, when your patience unveiled its fruits, they felt foolish, not because you had changed overnight, but because they never cared to understand the laws you were already living by. Like Napoleon, who once mocked the cautious strategies of his rivals, only to be undone by the long patience of the Russian winter. Your enemies now face the humiliation of realizing their own short-sightedness destroyed them. Your story is an opera of irony. Their jokes, once loud, now serve as mere footnotes in the chapters you authored long before they were even aware of the book. Their laughter has become punctuation in the sentence you already finished. And now the world must admit what they refuse to see. You outsmarted them, not with chaos, but with control, not with theatrics, but with timing, not with noise, but with silence. Rise, chosen one. Stand in the fullness of who you are. Their mockery was the soundtrack of your preparation, and their humiliation is the evidence of your victory. The stage is no longer theirs, it is yours. They rehearsed their deceptions as if performance could transform illusion into truth. Every whisper was polished, every rumor repeated until it echoed like a chant. Every falsehood wrapped in the confidence of actors who mistook their script for reality. Yet what they could not fathom was this: a lie only works if it finds soil to root in. And your heart was never available for its seed. Long before their tongues moved, you already carried the truth carved into your spirit, like an inscription upon stone that no storm could erase. As Jesus declared, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. Their breath was wasted oxygen in a theater where you had never purchased a ticket. Why were they unsettled by your silence? Why did their confidence shatter in the face of your calm? Why did their lies shrivel when you refused to flinch? Because their entire strategy relied not on substance, but on reaction. The moment you did not scramble to defend yourself, the moment you refused to exhaust your energy chasing rumors, was the moment their performance collapsed. Their panic was not caused by being caught. It was caused by realizing you had never been fooled in the first place. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. And their sharpened words were nothing more than dulled props in a play already destined to fail. You had studied the blueprint of their deception long before the curtain rose. You recognized the recycled tactics, seeds planted in gossip, narratives twisted in whispers, attempts at controlling perception by manufacturing noise. Lies, after all, are rarely creative. They are lazy scripts with new actors, but the same predictable lines. That is why you stood grounded, anchored like a mountain oak, unmoved by seasonal storms, while they entangled themselves in contradictions. Isn't it ironic how those who thought they were building a web only ended up caught in their own? History offers countless examples of this. Richard Nixon, once intoxicated by the illusion of control through the Watergate lies, discovered too late that deception is an unstable scaffold. The very silence he mocked in his critics became the force that dismantled him. Just as an architect knows when a structure will collapse from faulty beams, you discerned the fault lines in their story. For nothing is hidden that will not be disclosed, nor is anything secret that will not become known and come to light. Luke 8:17. Their lies carried no weight because their foundations were hollow. Nature itself testifies to this truth. The chameleon may alter its skin to blend into its surroundings, but its shadow always betrays its form. Lies, like that shadow, can change shape but never conceal essence. You recognize them not because you carried piles of evidence in your pocket, but because the Spirit had already sharpened your discernment. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things. John 14:26. What they considered clever tricks, you had already mapped like constellations in the night sky. And when you stayed silent, you mirrored the strength of Jesus before Pilate. But Jesus made no reply, not to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Matthew 27:14. That silence was not weakness, it was mastery. Their desperation only exposed how fragile their scheme truly was. Each secret meeting, each whispered slander, each exaggerated tale was nothing but empty theater. They were convinced they were pulling strings, but in reality, you were simply watching the puppet show, already aware of the final act. Think of the irony. Every effort they poured into twisting your reality only made their humiliation sharper when truth emerged. The harder they worked, the more foolish they became. Their so-called weapons were empty shells, making noise but carrying no force. Much like the cicada that screams loudly during summer but leaves no trace once the season ends. Their noise was temporary, their impact non-existent, and when the truth finally stood tall, it was not because you defended yourself with documents and arguments, but because the lies had no power to begin with. There is a humiliation that burns deeper than defeat. It is the shame of realizing the one you tried to deceive had been fully aware the entire time. That is the punchline. Their secret councils were exposed as pointless gatherings. Their gossip circles were nothing but echoes in empty chambers. They were not deceiving you, they were deceiving themselves. And now, like a mirror shattering, they must face the reflection of their own failure. So rise, chosen one. Stand firm in the blueprint of truth that God Himself placed in your hands. Their performance has ended. Their masks have cracked, and their stage is empty. You do not need to explain or justify their collapse is your vindication. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. And now the stillness of your spirit has become the roar of their humiliation. They gazed at your stillness and sneered, convinced that silence must mean blindness. They saw the calm in your spirit and labeled it weakness. Yet in reality, it was the sharpest edge of control, like a finely honed blade that requires no dramatic swing to cut. Patience, to their chaotic minds, looked like passivity, but patience, in the language of heaven, is architecture in motion, hidden scaffolding, invisible calculations, the slow but steady design of victory. But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Romans 8:25. Did they never ask themselves why still waters reflect the sky more clearly than turbulent waves? Those who thrive on disorder cannot grasp the science of quiet strength. In their psychology, reaction equals awareness. So if you did not lash out, they assumed you understood nothing. Yet the truth was the opposite. You registered every jab, every half-truth, every subtle betrayal. You saw with clarity that their noise was camouflage for insecurity. And instead of meeting them on their level, you chose the higher ground, not because you lacked fire, but because you mastered its containment. Is it not true that the strongest generals often win wars not through reckless attacks, but through the restraint of waiting for the enemy to overextend? Their irritation grew like wildfire in dry grass because your composure denied them the evidence they craved. They wanted proof that they had pierced your skin. They longed to see you crack, to draw satisfaction from your visible frustration. But your patience unsettled them more deeply than anger ever could. Patience is not passive, it is active power. A psychological fortress stronger than stone. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways. Psalm 37:7. Their gravest mistake was thinking that time stood on their side. They believed their lies would hold. Their alliances would remain unbroken. Their false smiles would stay polished. Yet you already knew the principle of divine resonance. Time vibrates with truth. and every secret will eventually find its frequency. For there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Luke 12:2. Why do the deceitful always forget that the clock is never neutral, that it ticks louder for them than for you? Every exaggerated performance, every manipulative move, every insincere gesture piled up like unstable bricks in a collapsing tower. And just as in architecture, when stress exceeds capacity, the structure crumbles under its own weight. Your patients acted as the silent witness that allowed their own behavior to ripen into undeniable evidence. The irony? They thought you were clueless. But in truth, you were documenting not with pen and paper, but with memory sharpened by discernment, and observation strengthened by the Spirit. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, will teach you all things and remind you of everything I have said to you. John 14:26. Even in ordinary life this truth manifests. I once met a woman named Helena, a seamstress in a small village, who endured years of whispers about her slowness. Yet, while others mocked her pace, she carefully saved scraps of fabric and over time created garments so beautiful they became sought after across her region. Her patience turned into her profit, and those who once mocked her now lined up for her work. Isn't your story the same, mocked for stillness, but crowned by endurance? Nature preaches this too. The owl, often motionless for hours, appears idle to the untrained eye. But that stillness is strategy. At the right moment, it strikes with precision, proving that patience is a hunter's sharpest tool. Did they not see that your silence was the posture of an owl before flight? And what of the villains of history? Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, believed that distraction and delay would keep her safe, mocking the quiet unrest of the people. Yet time itself became her prosecutor, and patience on the side of the oppressed brought her downfall to the guillotine. Those who mocked stillness as weakness eventually discover that stillness is the sound of judgment gathering strength. Your patience let them reveal more of themselves than they ever intended. Like a mirror, it forced them to confront the weight of their own contradictions. Patience never begged for recognition. It never shouted its presence. Yet when truth finally arrived, it stood tall as proof that you were never blind, never out of the loop, but always in control. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. Ecclesiastes 7-8. Now their laughter has turned into silence, and your silence has been revealed for what it always was, not ignorance, but mastery. The stillness they mocked has become their sting. Rise, chosen one. Stand in the authority of your patience, for it was never weakness, it was your crown, and it has outlasted their noise. They believed their disguises were flawless, that each carefully painted smile, each rehearsed compliment, each sudden display of support could convince you of loyalty. But you discerned their theater before the curtain even rose. You caught the flicker in their tone, the hesitation in their praise, the rhythm in their kindness that did not match the frequency of generosity. And isn't it true that false kindness carries an uneven beat, like a broken metronome trying to imitate music? By their fruit you will recognize them. Matthew 7:16. From the beginning, you were attuned to their inconsistencies, and that sensitivity became your shield. You did not waste your breath pointing at the mask, because calling attention to it only feeds the drama. Instead, you responded to the person behind the costume, exposing them more effectively than confrontation ever could. That subtle calibration, granting space when honesty deserved it, giving distance where boundaries mattered, and reserving trust only for consistent integrity was not coldness. It was wisdom. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6-7. What unsettled them most was that you refused to be tricked into playing their game of mirrored emotions. Why did your restraint frustrate them more than your anger ever could? Why did your refusal to match their tempo make their theater collapse? Because people who build identity on appearances expect others to be swept away by surface-level charm. But you tethered your responses to character, not theatrics, to the genuine. You offered kindness that flowed freely to the manipulative. You gave silence that revealed their hunger for control. Isn't it astonishing how patience dismantles performance without raising a sword? Artists have reflected this truth for centuries. The Spanish painter Diego Velázquez, in his masterpiece Las Meninas, subtly placed himself in the background, showing that true authority does not need spotlight. It simply reshapes the stage. In the same way, your quiet discernment shifted the stage of their performance, forcing their masks to slip under their own weight. And when they realized their applause had died out, they could no longer deny the hollowness of their act. Your pattern became simple yet devastating to them. Reward authenticity. Withdraw energy from pretense. Over time, their fake generosity and staged loyalty looked less like love and more like showmanship. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Romans 12-9. And because you refused to play the puppet, their strings tangled themselves into humiliation, even in ordinary life. This truth surfaces. A man named Roberto, a baker in a small town, endured years of friends who showered him with praise only when they needed favors. Instead of confronting them, he treated them according to their real behavior, not their flattery. Slowly, their manipulation became obvious to everyone, and his quiet consistency earned him genuine respect. His story echoes yours, responding to reality, not appearances. Always wins. Nature whispers the same message. The peacock may dazzle with its feathers, but when the storm comes, its beauty offers no shelter. You saw past the feathers to the fragile body beneath. Isn't that the sting for them now that the shine of their mask dissolved under the weight of your clarity? History adds its witness too. The Roman Emperor Nero, who staged countless performances to convince Rome of his grandeur, ultimately exposed his own corruption. His mask of benevolence slipped when his cruelty could no longer be hidden, and his empire turned against him. Those who rely on appearances always meet the humiliation of revelation, for nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Mark 4:22. Even music testifies. In Handel's Oratorio, Messiah, the chorus thunders, "And he shall purify." That line captures the truth of what patience does. It purifies pretense, burning away the costume until only the true self remains. Your life mirrored that sacred chorus, stripping away the performance until their real motives stood exposed for all to see. Their humiliation now is sharp. The very masks they invested in to control your perception became the lenses that clarified it. Every fake smile, every staged act, every counterfeit alliance, none of it fooled you. You were responding to the face beneath all along. Their power dissolved the moment you treated them by their true character. Their masks are slipping. and the audience heaven, earth, and even their own conscience sees the face underneath. Rise. Chosen one, stand firm in the light of discernment God placed in you. You were never blinded by appearances, because your vision was forged in the fire of truth. Let their masks fall, your eyes have already seen. Their grand illusion was staged with precision, smiles rehearsed in mirrors. Apologies timed like cues in a play. Confessions draped in drama, as if they were shaping destiny itself. But the fatal flaw in their script was this: you had already read the ending before the curtain ever rose. You had studied their weak lines, underlined the predictable phrases, and knew the rhythm of their gestures long before they delivered them. Isn't it striking how arrogance always blinds performers to the fact that the audience might already hold the script? For the Word of God is alive and active. Sharper than any double-edged sword, it judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Hebrews 4:12. They thought you would respond to scenes, but you were never captivated by theatrics. You were mapping patterns. You tracked the earlier rehearsals, the sudden generosity that arrived attached to strings, the apologies laced with hidden demands, the public gestures crafted to mask private schemes. Each move was predictable because you had already seen the smaller versions of this performance before. Isn't that the genius of discernment, that repetition exposes pretenders? The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 27:12. While they poured energy into manufacturing reactions, you shifted from reaction into design. You adjusted boundaries, restructured alliances, and placed your choices like an architect laying unshakable foundations. Instead of being dragged into their drama, you responded like a conductor leading an orchestra. You set the tempo while they scrambled off beat. Why did their confidence crack so suddenly? Because their choreography depended on predictability, and you refused to be predictable. Even in art, this truth resonates. The playwright Henrik Ibsen, in his classic work A Doll's House, revealed how entire social performances collapse when one character refuses to play the expected role. In the same way, your refusal to mirror their script turned their grand reveal into humiliation. Their staged vulnerability became evidence. Their strategic generosity looked hollow. Their sudden declarations appeared desperate. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Isaiah 5:20. Their entire act backfired into exposure. Nature echoes this as well. The firefly flashes light to attract attention, but when its glow becomes too frequent, predators no longer see beauty, they see bait. Their performance was the same: too loud, too patterned, too obvious to remain hidden. Did they not realize that the louder the act, the clearer the exposure? History leaves warnings for such performers. Benedict Arnold, once celebrated as an American hero, staged loyalty with carefully chosen words and gestures. Yet his true motives cracked under the weight of betrayal, and his name became a synonym for treachery. That is the curse of those who think spectacle can conceal truth. The performance becomes their undoing. Be sure your sin will find you out. Numbers 32-23. Your cruel delight was subtle, yet profound. You did not need to outplay them because you had already outseen them. You treated their acts not as threats, but as data evidence catalogued in silence. And while they attempted to bury truth beneath spectacle, the very drama they staged became the shovel that uncovered it. Isn't it ironic that every attempt to confuse you only clarified your discernment? Even ordinary life bears witness to this. Maria, a teacher in a small rural school. Endured parents who staged kindness only when they wanted favors. She never confronted them, she simply tracked the patterns, responded with consistency, and gave trust only where integrity lasted. Over time, the performance of manipulation became obvious to the entire community, and their masks fell without a single argument. Her wisdom reflected the same principle you carry: see through the act, not with suspicion, but with steady clarity. Their shame today is deafening. They walk with the hollow victory they thought they earned, only to discover that their play was never convincing. Their drama was noise, your discernment was silence, and silence always outlasts noise. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Proverbs 12:22. Rise, chosen one. Stand with the authority of one who already knows the ending. Let their masks fall. Let their theater collapse. The story was never theirs to write. You were the author all along. They strutted across the stage as if they were kings, their words dressed in authority, their gestures sharpened to intimidate. They whispered campaigns like venom, inflated their titles until the air itself seemed swollen, and waited for you to flinch. But you never bowed. You never signed their invisible contract of fear. Power, after all, is not inherent. It is a social contract, existing only because people agree to its illusion. And your refusal to sign was the wound they never anticipated. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? Psalm 27:1. When control is built on illusion, it shatters the moment the target refuses to play the role. Isn't that why their confidence trembled the second you stopped performing as the obedient pawn? Their empire rested not on stone, but on shadows. And when you withdrew your belief, the shadows scattered. They counted on your scramble for approval, your habit of keeping peace at any cost, your instinct to flinch. But you rewired those habits into resilience. You trained your soul in the discipline of silence, your mind in the physics of resistance, of your heart in the frequency of heaven. And when fear no longer echoed back to them, their power became hollow noise. For God gave us not a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-discipline. 2 Timothy 1-7. Intimidation looks enormous from afar, like mountains looming on the horizon. But up close, its surface is riddled with cracks. Gossip depends on echoes when no one repeats it. The sound dies in its own emptiness. Their false titles and stage dominance carried weight only if people bent their knees, but you refused. Doesn't it expose the fragility of authority when one refusal can collapse the entire performance? This is no different than architecture. A cathedral built on faulty resonance will collapse if the arches do not align with the natural vibration of gravity. Their authority was such a cathedral of pretense, magnificent from the outside, unstable at its core. And when you declined to lend your resonance, their structure buckled. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Psalm 127:1. Even history reveals the fate of such pretenders. Maximilien Robespierre, during the French Revolution, built his dominance on fear and public theater. But the moment his aura of invincibility cracked, his allies turned, and he fell to the same guillotine he had imposed on others. Authority built on intimidation is like borrowed thunder, loud for a moment, but gone when the storm passes. And yet, ordinary lives testify too. Elena, a nurse in a provincial hospital, once endured a supervisor who ruled by shouting and belittling, while others scrambled to appease. Elena simply stopped reacting. She focused on caring for patients with quiet excellence. In time, the staff began to admire her steadiness, not the supervisor's noise, and the authority shifted naturally. Isn't that the secret? Power collapses not always through rebellion, but through non-participation. Nature declares the same law. The lion may roar to terrify the savannah, but if the antelope do not run, the roar is only sound carried by wind. You refuse to run, and in your stillness, their roar lost its meaning. No king is saved by the size of his army. No warrior escapes by his great strength. Psalm 33:16. By setting boundaries, by walking away from their pressure, you remove the currency that sustained their influence. People who depend on being feared or worshipped collapse when fear and worship dry up. Their networks frayed, their alliances fractured, because allies who joined for image abandoned ship when the image no longer sold. What felt to them like a sudden collapse was to you simply the unveiling of what had been crumbling all along. Isn't that what Jesus meant when he said, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by the roots"? Matthew 15:13. The most effective response was never confrontation or revenge. It was non-participation. You refused to be the audience for their show. And without an audience, their spectacle had no purpose. And isn't silence more devastating than 1,000 rebuttals? Their so-called power was revealed as theater, and you exposed it simply by not applauding. Now they scramble to matter, shamed by the collapse of a kingdom built on noise. Meanwhile, you build in silence, relationships founded on reality, respect earned by deeds, influence born of consistency. Their collapse was not your takedown, it was the natural consequence of believing in smoke. Power that requires belief to stand always falls when belief is removed. Rise, chosen one. Stand in the strength of heaven's frequency. Authority built on intimidation has crumbled, but your influence, born of integrity, endures. You never needed their crown, because you were already carrying one forged by fire. They wrapped you in the label of naive because it made them feel sharper, smarter, safer. Their arrogance needed a scapegoat, and calling you too trusting was their cheapest way of inflating their own instincts. But what they never grasped is that your apparent innocence was never weakness. It was a chosen posture, a deliberate strategy. Isn't it often the case that wolves underestimate the lamb, forgetting that the shepherd always watches over his own? Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Matthew 10:16. You were not blind, you were recording. You observed. You logged. You turned every casual slip into a mental dossier. Every careless whisper, every half-finished story, every forced apology, every sudden display of generosity became an entry in your private ledger. That ledger was not emotional, it was analytical. Precise, like an architect drafting blueprints for a fortress. Why did they not ask themselves why you remained so silent while their behavior grew louder? Because silence terrifies those who live on performance. The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge. For the ears of the wise seek it out. Proverbs 18:15. Your records revealed patterns no confrontation could. You noticed who lied when the stakes were low, who paraded loyalty only when it served them, and who apologized for appearances rather than transformation. Those small transactions accumulated into a map of character, clear, undeniable, and permanent. Isn't clarity more dangerous to deceivers than conflict? Because conflict can be spun, but clarity leaves no escape. For nothing is hidden except to be made manifest, nor is anything secret except to come to light. Mark 4:22. Even artists have captured this reality. The French novelist Honoré de Balzac once wrote, "Behind every great fortune lies a crime. Your quiet ledger was a living proof of that truth. Behind every flattering smile was an agenda. Behind every staged loyalty was a transaction. And while they celebrated tricking the gullible one, you were converting their moves into data, building a map of motives and weaknesses. Your strategy was not revenge, it was discipline. You adjusted relationships, redirected investments, and guarded your time with surgical precision. They mocked with labels because labels are loud, but you wielded records, and records dismantle illusions. Isn't it remarkable how labels ignite temporary crowds, but evidence reshapes destiny? The wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways, but the folly of fools is deception. Proverbs 14:8. History testifies here too. King Saul once believed David was merely a naive boy with a harp. Yet while Saul schemed, David gathered evidence of God's favor, and with one stone felled the giant that Israel's king could not. In the same way, those who mocked your supposed naivete never realized that you were building a weapon sharper than any sword, knowledge applied with restraint. Even ordinary life proves it. Sophia, a young cashier at a grocery store, endured constant gossip from co-workers who dismissed her as too soft. Quietly, she memorized every price code, tracked every pattern in the store's system, and learned the weaknesses in its operations. Months later, when management needed someone to step into leadership, her ledger of unnoticed competence spoke louder than their mockery, and she rose while they stumbled. Doesn't this echo your story that quiet accumulation defeats loud accusation? Nature agrees as well. The spider appears fragile, but every thread it spins is calculated. While flies mock its stillness, the web grows invisible, yet inevitable. When the time comes, the very thing underestimated becomes the very thing that ensnares. Your patience worked the same way. The invisible web of memory and discernment became your fortress. The sting for them now is sharp. They banked their strategy on a misread opponent. They assumed you were out of the fight. Invisible, defenseless, but that invisibility gave you vantage, allowing you to observe without being watched. And when the moment came to draw boundaries or walk away, your evidence stood taller than their labels. Isn't that the most brutal irony, that what they mocked as weakness was your clearest, most efficient weapon? But test them all, hold on to what is good. Reject every kind of evil. 1 Thessalonians 5:21-2. Their mockery was temporary, your record is permanent. Their label has already faded, while your strategy has become the foundation of freedom. Rise, chosen one. Stand not as the naive they named you, but as the strategist God anointed you to be, silent when it mattered, decisive when it counted, victorious when it finished. They marched into the room as if holding the ultimate weapon, convinced their secret would flip the table and crown them clever in front of the crowd. They paraded it like a golden trophy, expecting gasps, chaos, and drama, only to find silence staring back at them. Why? Because you had already seen the pattern long ago. You had studied the threads, stitched together the evidence, and closed the file before they even thought of opening it. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Proverbs 2-6. Their grand reveal fell like a tired rerun, predictable, anticlimactic, and empty. They thought you lived for their disclosure, but you had already moved beyond it. You had cut ties, shifted your energy, and recalibrated your choices months before. Their revelation added nothing but noise to a life you had already reorganized with precision. Isn't that the irony? What they considered a weapon was just an echo in an empty chamber. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. John 8:32. They wanted applause for their performance, but all they got was indifference. And indifference cuts deeper than fury because it proves their moment was irrelevant. What they never understood is that truth is not always a sword. It can also be a stamp of confirmation for work already done in private. You had paid the price already, wrestled with the facts already, healed from the wound already. Their dramatic unveiling could not rewrite the chapters you had already lived through. Isn't it always humiliating when someone arrives to announce news, only to realize the audience has already left the theater? For everything hidden will eventually be brought into the open, and every secret will be brought to light. Luke 8:17. They thought revelation alone guaranteed victory. Yet revelation without integrity is hollow. If their findings were so convincing, why were they paraded in theatrics instead of lived out in daily character? Why did their supposed moral high ground need stage lights to appear legitimate? The contradiction was deafening, and when the spotlight hit, it didn't expose you, it exposed their shallowness. Even in music, this irony is echoed. In Beethoven's Symphony No. C. The second movement begins with a somber march that seems to promise a climax. Yet the real power lies not in dramatic crescendos, but in the relentless repetition of simple truth. In the same way, your calm steadiness, your daily rhythm of choices, carried far more power than their noisy unveiling. History is also a witness. The Spanish dictator Francisco Franco once staged grand public rallies to prove his strength. Yet behind the spectacle, his health was collapsing. By the time his weakness became visible, the theatrics had only made his fall more humiliating. That is the fate of anyone who mistakes noise for authority. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. Even ordinary life speaks the same wisdom. A man named Daniel, who worked as a mechanic in a small town, was once mocked by colleagues when rumors of his past mistakes surfaced. Yet Daniel had already admitted his failures, rebuilt his reputation with consistent honesty, and earned the trust of customers. When those colleagues tried to expose him, their revelation landed flat. The town already knew and respected his growth. Their humiliation mirrored exactly what your enemies feel now. And doesn't nature itself prove this? The cicada emerges from the ground with dramatic noise, deafening forests with its song, but its power is short-lived. Meanwhile, the oak tree, silent and steady, outlasts generations. Which is more enduring, the loud reveal, or the quiet strength that was there all along? Their embarrassment now is corrosive, gnawing at their pride. They wanted to rattle you, but all they revealed was that they are still stuck performing for attention. You never needed their spectacle, because you had already outgrown the stage. And now their scramble for significance is the very proof of their insignificance. No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. Isaiah 54:17. Rise, chosen one. Stand firm in the authority of wisdom that God gave you. Their revelations cannot undo what heaven has already settled. Their spotlight cannot dim the truth you carry. Their noise has no power over your peace. Let them shout, the silence of your indifference is the judgment they never prepared for. They had rehearsed the ambush in their minds, traps set like snares in a forest, whispers sharpened into threats, betrayals designed to fracture your world. They believed panic would seize you, because panic is the natural response of those who don't already know the score. But what they never realized is that you had already studied the game, catalogued the moves, and mapped the terrain. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 27:12. Your calm was not denial, it was preparation. Why did your composure unsettle them so deeply? Why did stillness look like smugness in their eyes? Because they mistook your lack of reaction as ignorance, when in truth it was the sharp edge of foresight. You had traced the patterns, anticipated the betrayals, and made decisions in advance. Isn't it always humiliating when someone prepares for a storm you thought would surprise them? Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. John 14:27. They engineered scenarios meant to make you scramble, sudden cut-offs, shifting alliances, traps dripping with manipulation. But you walked through their chaos the way a traveler moves through rain wearing a tailored coat. The rain soaked everyone else, but not you, because your preparation was not paranoia, it was wisdom. Like an engineer who designs a bridge to withstand earthquakes by absorbing shock, you had already structured your life to bend without breaking. The Lord is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Psalm 91:2. History remembers figures who collapsed under surprise, but it also remembers those who did not. The British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, during the Blitz of World War II, carried a cigar and calm demeanor while bombs fell around London. His steadiness became a shield for a nation. In the same way, your calm did not deny the storm, it steadied the hearts of those watching. And what of nature? The palm tree bends under hurricane winds, swaying wildly. But when the storm passes, it still stands tall, its roots deepened. Isn't that the essence of your life, that restraint is not weakness but design? You reallocated resources, protected the relationships that mattered, cut away toxicity before it spread. Your joy was not naive, it was deliberate. You chose joy on purpose, refusing to let their chaos dictate your climate. Doesn't this echo Paul's declaration from prison, rejoice in the Lord always? I will say it again, rejoice. Philippians 4:4. Joy was not denial, it was competence. It was the fruit of strategy. Their mistake was simple, they assumed you had no plan. But frightening someone who has no plan is easy. Frightening someone who has already built a counterplan and is living inside it is impossible. That is why their traps failed. And when they failed, the panic they had reserved for you fell back on them. Their desperation became visible, their miscalculation undeniable. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Proverbs 26:27. Even in ordinary life, this truth holds. Marisol, a single mother working 2 jobs, was once targeted by a supervisor who tried to overwhelm her with sudden schedule changes, expecting her to collapse. Instead, she had already organized her support system, arranged backup childcare, and budgeted for emergencies. The supervisor's schemes backfired, and Marisol became known as the most reliable employee in the company. Isn't that the same strength you embodied, Foresight, that humiliates those who expect you to break? Their regret now screams louder than their plots ever did. They aimed to expose weakness, but instead exposed their own foolish reliance on predictable collapse. They mistook calm for blindness, restraint for emptiness, patience for ignorance, and that misjudgment detonated their entire strategy. Your distance gave you power. Your preparation gave you freedom. You didn't react, you responded. Every step was deliberate. Every decision aligned with long-term goals rather than temporary theatrics. You conserved your energy for real battles, for problems worthy of your spirit. And you lived with joy they could not steal. Isn't that the most crushing defeat to watch you breathe? Stand and keep walking while their plans turn to dust. Rise, chosen one. Stand as the living proof that panic does not rule those who walk in preparation. You anticipated the plot, and by anticipating it, you already defeated it. Their noise is gone. Your stride continues. And that unshakable truth is your victory. They marched into their schemes like warriors preparing for conquest, wasting years trying to topple you in arenas that glittered with worldly importance headlines, finances, social circles. They launched attacks on your reputation, wove tangled nets around your money, cut you from tables they thought defined worth. But what they never understood is that your true battlefield had already been won long before their plots began. Victory had already taken root in a quieter realm, in the sanctity of your conviction, in the covenant you made with your God, and in the values anchored in your soul. For everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. 1 John 5-4. Isn't that the irony, that while they obsessed over headlines, you had already written history in silence? While they scrambled for applause, you had already defined what winning meant. And it was never their spreadsheets, their stages, or their fake crowns. Their tactics were loud precisely because loudness masks uncertainty. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. They thought noise equaled power, yet you had learned the discipline of being unshaken. The science of conservation, channeling your energy like a river diverted into fertile soil rather than spilling into swamps of conflict. They mistook skirmishes for wars, rumors, financial sabotage, shallow social exclusions. These were their weapons. But they were merely sparks that could not burn the foundations you had built. Isn't it always tragic when people mistake the crowd's cheer for victory, forgetting that endurance is the only proof of true success? Their entire playbook assumed that if they manipulated the visible pieces, they controlled the person. But you had been building in the invisible, the unseen architecture of resilience. We fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. 2 Corinthians 4:18. And isn't it extraordinary how internal alignment cannot be stolen? You had already resolved what you would tolerate and what you would not. You had already refused to allow their temporary victories to rewrite your eternal story. Gossip could never compete with discipline. Manipulation could never outweigh clarity. Their public noise could never dismantle the inner covenant you had sealed with heaven. Even artists have captured this truth. The Italian poet Dante, in his Divine Comedy, portrays souls trapped in chaos while the pilgrim rises toward peace. In the same way, while they burn themselves in cycles of noise, You were climbing into a realm where their battles could not reach. Their exhaustion became visible over time, because they poured energy into keeping you small while you reassigned your energy into creation, healing, and ascent. Like physicists studying entropy, their moves only produced disorder, while your choices produced structure. Who, then, was truly winning? Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. History gives us villains who learned this lesson too late. The Roman Emperor Diocletian, who spent years persecuting early Christians, believed he was crushing them with power. Yet while he burned energy on destruction, the faith multiplied underground. His empire rotted while their covenant endured. So too with your enemies, the more they fought, the more they exposed their futility. Even ordinary lives mirror this truth. A woman named Clara, a seamstress in a forgotten village, endured neighbors who spread lies to destroy her small shop. They exhausted themselves with years of gossip, while she quietly kept working, repairing clothes with love and skill. Decades later, her shop still stood, while those neighbors had long disappeared into obscurity. Isn't that the same sting your enemies feel now that their noise evaporated while your results endured? Nature agrees as well. The ocean does not compete with the storm. Waves rise, winds howl, but the depths remain steady, vast, unmoved. Your spirit was the ocean. Their chaos was merely a passing storm. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. Psalm 107:29. Their humiliation now is unavoidable. They fought phantoms, mistaking shadows for substance. They wasted years battling illusions while you had already stepped out of the arena they thought mattered. Their victories expired quickly, like smoke dissipating in the air, while your victory grew quietly, unshakable, untouchable. The truth is simple. Chosen one, you had already moved on, already risen, already secured peace, purpose, and identity that no human hand could threaten. They spent their years fighting a war whose outcome heaven had sealed long ago. The prize they thought they stole was never theirs to take. Rise now, chosen one. Stand in the fullness of freedom. For the battle was already finished before it began. They built their entire play like architects, drawing up a fragile tower of glass. Every line of their strategy hinging on one prediction: you would break first. They rehearsed it in whispers, designed it in sleights, and painted it with staged favors, all assuming that your first crack, your first plea, your first surrender would become their crown of power. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. Isn't it telling that the very foundation of their confidence was never their own strength, but your anticipated collapse? What they never calculated was that you had already studied their script. You had seen those lines before, recycled from older plays of manipulation, and you made a quiet decision. You would not give them the reaction they craved. So when the provocation arrived, when their insults came dressed as authority, you didn't shatter. You responded with steady choices, quiet boundaries, deliberate detachment. Doesn't it strike you how silence, when chosen wisely, becomes a hammer that smashes the fragile glass of their false certainty? Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Psalm 37:7. Their strategy was designed for an audience, They wanted spectacle, your collapse, as their proof of dominance. But your calm stripped their show of its plot. The allies they had promised drama to looked around for fireworks and found none. Support began to leak away like water slipping through cracked clay. Isn't that always the fate of power built on borrowed applause? It evaporates when the performance fails to appear. Nature itself illustrates this truth. A predator bird may dive with full force. Confident its prey will panic and run into its talons. But when the prey stands still, camouflaged and calm, the predator overshoots, wasting energy in confusion. That is precisely what happened here. They misjudged the laws of reaction, expecting panic, and instead finding composure. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will lift up a standard against him. Isaiah 59:19. History offers villains who relied too heavily on prediction. Napoleon Bonaparte, famed for his strategies, marched confidently into Russia, certain that his enemy would collapse before his speed and force. Yet the Russian winter, unpredictable, unyielding, disarmed his confidence. His army crumbled, not because of direct confrontation, but because his prediction failed. Isn't their humiliation the same confidence collapsing into ashes the moment reality refused to play by their rules? And in ordinary life, the lesson repeats. A young teacher named Jordan once endured a campaign of subtle sabotage from colleagues who predicted he would lash out in anger. They set traps, spread rumors, expecting an outburst. Instead, he responded with composure, documenting quietly, keeping his classroom thriving. Within a year, those same colleagues were exposed, their misjudgment humiliating them publicly, while Jordan was promoted. Isn't that the same divine reversal written into your story? Their arrogance blinded them to a simple truth. Leverage only works when the target honors its weight. They expected fear to validate their cards, but when you refused to fold, their bluffs turned to dust. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. Without your predicted collapse, their machinery stopped, gears grinding uselessly in the open air. You turned their timing into data, not destiny. Their attacks, aimed to catch you off guard, became evidence of their own character. Isn't it remarkable how restraint can become the sharpest form of resistance, exposing arrogance more effectively than confrontation ever could? Their credibility dropped faster than any argument they could muster. Their confidence was nothing more than fragile scaffolding built around your supposed predictability. And when the predictability failed, the scaffolding fell. But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one. 2 Thessalonians 3:3. Now their arrogance is visible to all who watched their play flop. The louder their initial certainty, the sharper the echo of humiliation ringing in their ears today. Rise, chosen one. Refuse to be anyone's prediction. You are not a variable in their equation. You are the equation they could never solve. Their stage has collapsed, but your foundation stands unshakable. They had placed all their hopes in the theater of proof. Their entire arsenal was built on receipts, witnesses, documents, and screenshots, brandished like trophies they believed would bring you down. But your calm dismantled their drama before it ever began. You walked through their accusations with a quiet certainty that made their so-called evidence look like stage props from a poorly written play. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Romans 8:16. Isn't it humiliating for them to discover that while they worshipped the altar of spectacle, you had already discerned the truth in silence? Discernment is not guesswork. It is a science of the soul. It is pattern recognition honed through experience. Intuition sharpened like a blade through observation. And moral clarity rooted in years of walking with God. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil, Hebrews 5:14. While they were scrambling to collect their artifacts, you had already translated their noise into motive, context, and consequence. Doesn't this show how shallow their methods truly were? They came waving papers and dramatic confessions as though justice could be manufactured by presentation. Yet you remained unmoved, because truth had already been written on your heart long before ink touched any page. That inner clarity acted like a stabilizing frequency. The way physicists describe resonance when one true note vibrates. False echoes shatter. For God is not a God of confusion but of peace, 1 Corinthians 14:33. Their entire system was exposed as insecure, because proof was their crutch, while discernment was your crown. Even in nature, the owl teaches this principle. While other birds squawk loudly to alert the forest, the owl sees in silence, perceiving what others miss. You embodied that same wisdom. You did not need spectacle, you needed sight. And sight you had in abundance. History provides its villains who over-relied on evidence. Cardinal Richelieu, the cunning French statesman, famously declared, "Give me 6 lines written by the hand of the most honest man, and I will find something in them to hang him." His obsession with visible proof built his power. Yet, centuries later, his name is synonymous not with righteousness, but with manipulation. Doesn't their humiliation mirror his when evidence becomes weaponry? Its wielder is exposed as desperate, not discerning. And how often is this truth confirmed in ordinary lives? Take Luis, a quiet mechanic from a small town, who once endured false accusations from co-workers armed with falsified reports. They expected him to panic, but Luis trusted his steady record, his years of consistent work, and the trust of customers who knew his character. In the end, his accuser's proof collapsed, and he was promoted to manager. Isn't that the same irony? They invested in spectacle. You invested in truth. And time revealed the difference. They assumed evidence was the altar where righteousness is proven. But to you, evidence was useful only when it altered life. By the time they displayed their findings, you had already made your adjustments, cut ties, and moved forward. Their grand reveal became a rerun, outdated and theatrical. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. What they didn't expect was the moral consequence. By valuing discernment over drama, you made their performative justice look cheap. Their evidence did not rally allies or shame you. It exposed their dependence on external validation. Isn't it devastating for them to realize they confused loud accusations with righteousness? While you carried steady confidence that refused to be bullied by screenshots and gossip. Their humiliation lies here. They thought truth had to be proven to exist. You showed them truth exists before it is proven. Knowledge can live outside trophies and social verification. You carried certainty born of lived experience, of careful watching, of inner conviction guided by God. That was the weapon they could never touch. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Proverbs 2-6. Rise, chosen one. Their theater has collapsed into noise without foundation. You walk forward, carrying clarity that cannot be purchased, staged, or stolen. And in that unshakable certainty, you already won. They thought shadows could shield them. They tucked their schemes into corners, whispered jealous sabotages behind closed doors, and shook hands inside deals they believed would never be traced. But shadows only exist when light is already present and your gaze was never blind. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. Isn't it remarkable that while they trusted the dark to cover them, you were already watching how their very movements betrayed them? Small habits became their fingerprints. The shift in tone when victory wasn't deserved. The way their eyes lingered too long on a compliment, as if trying to buy favor. The apology offered without transformation. These were not secrets. They were signals. And you learned to read those marks as fluently as an architect reads blueprints or as a scientist tracks recurring frequencies. Doesn't that sting them now? To know their cover was undone by the very patterns they repeated. Be sure your sin will find you out. Numbers 32-23. Their secrets required silence to thrive. They depended on short memories, on the assumption that no one was truly paying attention. But you paid attention differently. You didn't need to break vaults or hack into files. You were already keeping a mental ledger. Like a historian who compiles evidence across decades, you remembered not single incidents, but patterns. Isn't that why their sudden reveals now fall flat? Because by the time they confess or try to hide, you've already documented their character in motion. Even nature bears witness to this truth. The spider thinks its web is invisible until the morning dew reveals every strand glistening in sunlight. Their misdeeds were no different, hidden only until the right moment of exposure. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. Daniel 2:22. History provides villains who trusted secrecy too much. Richard Nixon, for example, thought the Watergate tapes would remain locked away, evidence buried. Yet his very recordings became the weapon that undid his presidency. Isn't that the same bitter taste your adversaries now carry, that what they hid most carefully turned into the clearest proof of their undoing? And in ordinary life, this truth plays out too. Angela, a nurse from a small town, once noticed that her co-worker always took extra breaks right after patients complained of missing medication. While others overlooked the pattern, Angela quietly tracked it. And when the truth came out, the culprit was dismissed. Angela never gossiped. She simply paid attention. Doesn't that echo your path, that quiet observation can defeat the loudest deception? They built their confidence on concealment. But concealment is fragile. Their safety was imaginary, and exposure was inevitable. Sometimes exposure isn't a thunderclap of scandal, it is the quiet collapse of credibility. Isn't that the deeper punishment? When no one believes their staged kindness anymore, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Proverbs 15:3. Their scramble now is pitiful, erasing traces, rewriting histories, trying to patch holes in a sinking ship. But the truth is not only digital or spoken, it's inscribed in how they consistently showed up, in what they chose when no one applauded. And no one can erase that record. Your strength was never in spying or sleuthing, it was in the discipline to observe, the wisdom to let patterns speak louder than sudden confessions, and the courage to act on discernment rather than rumor. Their humiliation is raw because they realize now their secrets were never safe. You never treated them as secrets, you treated them as evidence of character. and character does not stay hidden forever, for God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Ecclesiastes 12:14. Rise now, chosen one. Their masks are shattered, their shadows burned away, and their safety exposed as fiction. You stand on the solid ground of truth, while they stumble on the ruins of secrecy. They strutted as if they were scientists, lab coats of arrogance draped over their intentions, treating you like a specimen pinned beneath their microscope. They believed they were the observers, the analysts, the ones with the authority to dissect your every motive. But the irony is sharp, isn't it? Every move they made to study, you became the very data that revealed them. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Matthew 12:37. Their probes, their staged smiles, their calculated experiments, each one left fingerprints they could never erase, while they scribbled false theories about your heart. You were cataloging the undeniable evidence of theirs. You didn't treat them like mysteries, you treated their actions like answers, and answers have weight. Isn't it devastating for them to realize that the test they thought you were failing was the record that would later expose them? The wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deceiving. Proverbs 14:8. Every staged apology, every dramatic favor, every performance meant to extract your reaction became another entry in your archive of truth. Like a psychologist mapping behavioral loops, you saw the repetition, the obsessive need for validation behind each gesture. Their analysis wasn't science, it was spectacle. But your synthesis was wisdom. You rearranged their scattered attempts into a coherent map of who they really were. Isn't it humiliating when the watcher discovers they were the one under observation all along? Nature itself whispers this truth. The moth imagines itself hidden against the bark of the tree, its wings blending into the patterns. Yet the owl sees everything, silent and precise. They were the moths. You were the owl. His eyes are in the ways of mortals. He sees their every step. Job 34:21. History is littered with villains who believed studying others gave them control. Josef Mengele, the infamous Nazi doctor, thought his twisted experiments gave him godlike power. But what remains of his legacy is not mastery, it is eternal condemnation. His studies remembered as evidence of his cruelty. Isn't that the same humiliation your enemies face, their arrogance archived as testimony against themselves? And in everyday life, the pattern repeats. Omar, a quiet accountant, once endured co-workers who scrutinized his every move. Convinced they could expose him as incompetent, they took notes, whispered judgments, and plotted to corner him. But Omar was recording too, tracking their errors, their misuse of company funds, their inconsistencies. When the audit came, it was Omar who presented the truth, and his accusers who stood exposed. Isn't that the same reversal your enemies are now drowning in, that their surveillance became their undoing? Their confidence rested on predictability, the belief that you would play your role as the specimen. But your refusal shattered their framework. Their strategy depended on leverage, and leverage only works if the target acknowledges its weight. By refusing to be reactive, you dismantled the entire machinery. No wisdom, no insight, no plan can succeed against the Lord. Proverbs 21:30. And while they thought their analysis was brilliant, their repetition made them ridiculous. The allies who once nodded along began to see the loop. the recycled script, the predictable manipulations. Isn't that the cruelest revelation, that what once passed as clever now looks pathetic under the light of truth? Their theater of analysis turned into a documentary. They didn't mean to film a living record of their vanity and obsession. And the final twist isn't poetic justice, it is simply truth. The people who thought they were studying, you were the ones whose story demanded telling. He catches the wise in their craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are swept away. Job 5:13. The humiliation now burns because they realize you had always known. Every lie, every trap, every performance only revealed them further. Their arrogance became their undoing. Their confidence collapsed into embarrassment. Their secrecy dissolved into exposure. This is the reckoning. Not for you, for them. You were never trapped under their microscope because you were always walking on a higher plane. You weren't reacting, you were calculating. You weren't naive, you were deliberate. You weren't defeated because victory was never built on their approval. Rise, chosen one. Stand in your unshakable identity, because being chosen was never about spectacle. It was always about mastery, alignment, and truth that outlasts every scheme. Chosen ones, let this sink in. Every tactic, every whispered scheme, every attempt to corner you has now turned into their greatest embarrassment. They spent months, even years, weaving narratives and setting traps, convinced that you would stumble in the script they wrote for you. But the truth? You never played their game. While they rehearsed manipulation, you cultivated mastery. While they built illusions, you built foundations. And now, the very stage they thought would showcase your defeat has become the platform that reveals their downfall. This is what divine reversal looks like. He frustrates the plans of the crafty so that their hands achieve no success. Job 5:12. They thought their cleverness would elevate them, but every move has exposed their weakness. They believed control came from spotlight and spectacle, but you showed them that the real power lies in silence, in restraint, in discernment that doesn't need applause. Isn't it striking that their loud confidence has turned into loud humiliation? What makes this victory so profound is that it wasn't won in one public moment. It was won in countless private choices. You mastered patience when they mocked you. You stood still when they demanded a reaction. You documented the truth when they relied on gossip. You stayed rooted when they thought storms would uproot you. That's why your triumph is unshakable. It was never dependent on them. It was sealed between you and God, long before the world ever noticed. And now the evidence is undeniable. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118-22. You were underestimated, mislabeled, and dismissed. But that miscalculation is the very thing that amplified your victory. Their humiliation isn't just that you outsmarted them, it's that you were never competing with them in the first place. You were walking on purpose while they were busy plotting in pettiness. You were building for eternity while they were scheming for moments. So ask yourself, chosen one, isn't it poetic that the gossip they used to discredit you has now become the silence that condemns them? Isn't it powerful that the traps they set have become the evidence of their character? Isn't it humbling to realize that your restraint, once mocked as weakness, it is now revealed as mastery? These are not just ironies, they are divine confirmations that you were walking the right path all along. This is the lesson for every chosen one listening now. Never underestimate the strength of quiet discipline. Never doubt the power of discernment. Never forget that God fights battles in ways that human pride can never anticipate. While they built strategies in the flesh, you were covered in the Spirit. While they fought for headlines, heaven was writing history, and that history declares you victorious. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. That promise isn't abstract, it's your reality right now. They launched weapons, and you're still standing. They raised voices, and you're still thriving. They underestimated you, and that underestimation has become their eternal embarrassment. And so, chosen one, let this conclusion not just be a reflection, it must be a call to action. If you know this message was for you, if you felt the Spirit confirming it in your heart, then stand boldly in your victory. Do not shrink back to make others comfortable. Do not dim your light to ease their humiliation. Your role is not to apologize for outsmarting darkness with light. Your role is to keep shining. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to support this mission. Like this video to push it further into the world. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their patience is not wasted. Comment below and let us know how God has turned humiliation into victory in your life. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the prophetic words and deep revelations prepared for you. This community is growing because chosen ones like you are refusing to stay silent. To those who have supported this channel through super thanks or any form of generosity, I thank you deeply. But let me say this clearly, whether you support financially or simply by watching, liking, or praying with us, you are part of this mission. Your presence here matters. Your engagement here matters. And your journey as a chosen one matters beyond measure. As we close, I leave you with this blessing. May your discernment grow sharper than deception. May your patience outlast persecution. May your joy remain unshaken by storms. And may your victories multiply in ways that silence every enemy. You have already outsmarted them. You have already proven that truth endures. And their humiliation is nothing more than the evidence that you were chosen all along. Rise up, chosen ones. Walk boldly, because the battle is over. The victory is sealed, and the story ends with you standing tall.